Pilipino man. Maaabot lahat ng kasipagan ng sagot. Salat ka man sa kayamanan. Buksan ang pahina ng mga aklat ng karunungan. Edukasyon ating kailangan, kamamangan ating iwanan. Peace!
Ating lilipalin, ating babawin,
ating tanawin,
bagong pag-asa ay muling tatanawin.
Kinabukasan tagumpayin, pilitin mong gawin.
Puspos ang pagsisikap,
Pag-asa ay yakapin. Edukasyon ang kayamanan ng kahit ninuman. Isang pangarap ang tutupad, pagsisikapan ng lahat.
puspos ang pagsisikap,
Kaya mo yun, kaibigan.
mabubuo isang pangarap.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought unprecedented changes to our usual ways of living. But the Department of Education remains unfazed by these challenges to fulfill the mission of Sulong Edukalidad, the rallying call for national effort to deliver quality basic education to all Filipinos, which involve aggressive reforms in the 4 key areas: the K-12 curriculum review and update, improving the learning environment, teachers upskilling and reskilling, and engagement of stakeholders for support and collaboration to move forward together as we prepare the education system for the future. The call for Sulong Edukalidad will continue, and we have built the framework of the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan, or the BELCP, to put the needs of the learners at top priority. DepEd's BELCP is the major response and commitment to protect the health, safety, and well-being of learners, teachers, and personnel. The plan aims to provide opportunities to continue education even in these trying times with a BELCP in place, supported by an unprecedented number of diverse stakeholders from the academe, media, industry groups, NGOs, business and private individuals. Sulong Edukalidad will be able to sustain the aims in its reform for quality basic education. In our journey towards quality education, we have established the 4 pillars of aggressive reforms from the start, and we have been continuing to progress in these pillars. In improving the learning environment, we took action in the construction and rehabilitation of school buildings, ensured the availability of learning materials and equipment, and prioritized our last mile schools. The challenges of the pandemic also brought to light the urgent need to upgrade our ICT infrastructure to service the needs of education. In terms of the teachers upskilling and reskilling, we were able to establish more innovative professional standards for teachers and school heads. We have aligned the professional development of teachers with their career progression to track their development as part of the National Educators Academy of the Philippines transformation. With the launch of the Education Futures program, where we will be focusing on innovative actions and solutions to improve the state of our education, we are now more than ready to start a new journey and continue our fight for quality education for all Filipino learners. Finally, we've given high importance to the engagement of stakeholders for support and collaboration. In support of this, we have convened the Philippine Forum for Accessible Quality Basic Education, or the Education Forum, which leverage other partnerships for education quality and strengthen partnership with the Philippine Normal University as the country's national center for teacher education. The department has also been developing a professional development program for teachers and school leaders in order to equip them with the skills, materials, and data that will allow them to help their students prepare for PISA 2022. This intervention consists of the following components: online training for teachers and school leaders, development of learning materials and practice tests for students, deepening the analysis of the PISA 2018 results, and supporting school-level action research. Now that the year is about to end, our commitment to Sulong Edukalidad will continue and will be far from being gone. With a lot at stake, considering our new knowledge and experience from this year's challenges, we are equipped to face a new future. As we head on to the future where we will face many challenges and uncertainties, the department will always be the guardian of every Filipino learner's right to education.
Socrates once said that true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
Plato once said, the right question is usually more important than the right answer.
And Aristotle once said that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Welcome to DepEd Teaches, where thinking critically is embraced as we search for better solutions and newer ways to improve teaching and learning during this time of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. It has always been our pleasure to offer meaningful discussions and exchange of ideas in our official Facebook page, the DepEd Teaches, alongside with our various social media platforms, namely the DepEd Philippines Facebook page, the DepEd TV YouTube channel, and DepEd Tayo. Let's continue to unravel the depth and the breadth of our October theme, teaching and learning in the new normal, trends and innovations, as we talk about heuristic and metacognitive assessment. Sound fascinating, right, dear viewers? Good afternoon, Ma'am Ana. So any thoughts of our topic today?
Wishing a splendid afternoon, everyone, to all our viewers here on DepEd Teaches. Hello, Sir July. I'm looking forward to learning new things today about assessment because what really caught my attention are these two striking words, heuristic and metacognition. I believe all our viewers have a good understanding already of what assessment and how we do assessments. We've had many engagements about assessment, but this time it is more interesting because we're going to focus our attention on heuristic and metacognitive practices. You know, Sir July, I was looking for the meaning, and according to Merriam-Webster, heuristic means learning, discovery, problem solving by experimental and especially trial and error methods. While metacognition means awareness or analysis of one's thinking or learning. So my thoughts here, Sir July, is that probably our teachers, we've been doing heuristic and metacognitive assessment, but we are not aware that these strategies are called that way, or we know these strategies, but we are not confident to execute, or we are doing but not entirely the correct way of implementing such strategies. So this session, I believe it is going to be very important because this will deepen our understanding and appreciation of assessment through the lens of metacognition. I know it may seem like big ideas, but don't worry, dear viewers. This is manageable, and we are confident that you can use these strategies in the distance learning modalities.
Sounds wonderful indeed, Ma'am Ana. I couldn't imagine how exciting learning would be if we apply metacognition in our assessment. And I'm sure it's going to yield huge impact and positive results because when we talk about metacognition, we are more conscious of our thinking and actions, and it truly promotes reflective and deep thinking, which will guide us to make informed decision in teaching. Although metacognition is not new in education, but this concept might still be an elusive idea, especially now that we are implementing learning delivery modalities, primarily the use of the self-learning modules. It is good starting point in our discussion that we will be integrating the application of heuristic and metacognition strategies in our assessment. And of all the learning theories and models, in what ways and how will metacognition help us address our challenges in assessment? So we will have these various topics, and we worry about academic integrity, compliance, and engagement and motivation in our current scenario. But let us keep in mind that there is a solution to every problem, and I believe these metacognition strategies and heuristic strategies can help us deliver better instruction in remote teaching. And as we all know, metacognition is centered on individual, thinking on one's thinking. So even without the peers, our learner's peer, one can practice and develop his or her metacognitive skills. So this will make it more ideal during this time when learners are driven to study independently. And so I guess this gives a rough idea on what we expect for today. But before we ring the curtain up to our notable speaker, let us have a quick mental exercise. So this is just the same as what we did last week, green light and red light. So the popularity of this game is all over the internet, and we will have it modified in a tame version. So we will use green light if there's an attempt to incorporate metacognition, and red light if there is none. So we will provide 4 scenarios or cases, and share with us your answers whether you agree that corresponds to your answer. Green if you think there's the situation manifests metacognitive instruction. Then if there's you think there's no metacognitive or metacognition in that scenario, then choose red. So again, just write red or green in our live stream social media pages comment section. And similar to our previous post, we will give 30 seconds for you to write your answers. All right, I think we can now start, Ma'am Ana.
All right. Thank you, Sir July. I think the instructions are very clear because we did this last time. So you just have to key in green or red in the comment section. You know, Sir July, I just remember that we talked about metacognition already before here on DepEd Teaches, and we had a warm-up activity about myths and misconception. So this time, we want to focus on strategies, or we want to visualize how a classroom looks like or teaching and learning looks like when we consider metacognition. Okay, so let us show them now our first case or first scenario. So let me read to you. Andrea reads the selection and answers conversion type of questions, focusing on the details of the story. Then she immediately proceeds to the next activity in the module. So is metacognition considered in this example? Please type green for yes and red for no. You may answer now. All right, so let's reveal the correct answer. Is it green or red? Red light for no. So this is a familiar reading activity, but it seems there is little or no attempt at all to practice metacognition. Answering questions after the story may be just a simple comprehension check unless the questions prompt the learner to reflect on his or her own thinking process. There should have been activities like before and during to check understanding, where students themselves can generate their own question, like self-questioning strategy. So this is very helpful and it can be used in any stage of the lesson. Like for example, it can be done informally, silently, or aloud, where they write their answer, for example, through a reflective journal. So students have a written conversation with themselves about their thinking.
All right. I hope our viewers were able to get it or to get it correctly. And the case we're given is very much common and very much familiar to our use of modular learning delivery. Okay, for our second situation, let us show them now the card. As the new school year has started, Mr. Reyes asked his class to identify their personal learning goals and describe what success looks like for them. Learners chart out hindering and enabling reasons that will affect in reaching their goals. Then Mr. Reyes collated and provided individual feedback. The following day, he had a whole class discussion clarifying and communicating some adjustments about the short and long-term goals for the year. All right, can you consider here metacognition in this teaching and learning process? Is it a green or a red? 30 seconds, start now. All right, we can now reveal the answer. If this scenario manifests or applies metacognitive strategy, so the answer here is green or green light. So this example uses metacognitive strategy where the goal setting directs learning. So this is a great activity for articulating learning intentions and developing strategies to achieve them. So this situation is a good example of metacognitive practice under planning, where goal setting is part of improving metacognitive skills in order to direct learning. So this is a great activity for articulating the goals and developing the strategies in achieving them, and students can control their learning processes and learning outcomes through the deliberate self-regulatory decisions and actions of which goal setting is a central part.
That's a good example, Sir July. Goal setting is very evident, not only in schools, but even in our personal lives and in political, social institutions. Setting direction is very important. Okay, so for the next question, let us show the card now. After discussing the lesson and doing some learning tasks, the teacher said or asked, "Is there any question?" And then the class answered in chorus, "None." Teacher ended the class, "Okay, that's it for today. I will see you tomorrow." Is it a green or red light? So you have 30 seconds to share your answer in our comment section. Okay, so let's find out the answer. Is it a green or red light? And I see a lot of red light answers in our Facebook live stream page. So the correct answer is it's a red light. This is a familiar classroom scenario, how a teacher usually wraps up the learning session. There's little or no attempt at all to encourage reflective thinking, as well as thinking about in terms of what went well and what they would do differently next time. So a better way to modify this, like for example, using some exit ticket strategy where students spend time reflecting on what went well, what they've learned, and what they would do differently next time. So this ensures that they are learning as much as possible from the experience and such are developing and improving.
That is valued suggestion, Ma'am Anna. As educator, we can promote metacognition practices by letting our learners spend time reflecting on how they did about the given task and how they could improve the next time. All right, let's now move on to our last scenario. We can show this on the screen now. When Paulo got a poor score on the first task in what's more of the self-learning module or SLM, he reviewed the what is it part. When he answered the second task and his score improved, Paulo organized his notes and sought assistance from the learning facilitator to provide him more examples that he could study and add in his notes. Then, Paulo compared his scores in the assessment and what's more, and scheduled consultation with his learning facilitator to clarify some parts he had difficulties. Okay, so tell us if it's a green or red, if this scenario manifests or considered metacognition as a teaching and learning strategy. So let's start now. All right, I think we can now show the answer now. if this scenario manifests or applies metacognitive strategy? So the answer here is green or green light. So in the example, the learner demonstrates metacognitive skills by being strategic and reflective about or upon his learning while it is happening, considering the success or failure of these strategies and revising them as appropriate as he used different strategies to attain his goals. So in this given scenario, this shows metacognitive regulation or what learners do about learning. It describes how learners monitor and control their cognitive processes. For example, a learner might realize that a particular strategy is not achieving the results that they want, so they decide to try a different strategy. So, all right, we hope that you have been energized in this simple mental exercise. These familiar scenarios, but the challenge here, these are familiar scenarios, but the challenge here is up to what extent we are aware if these learning situations promote metacognition. And so at this point, we know that we have provided you a good introduction to our today's topic. Let us meet now our resource speaker who has prepared a more practical and straightforward discussion about metacognition.
It is an honor to present to you our resource speaker today. Dr. Carpo Magno is a board member of the Philippine Educational Measurement and Evaluation Association. He is the founder of the Center for Learning and Assessment Development Asia. His specialized area is on measurement, evaluation, and the analysis of test data, particularly that of item response theory. He was trained in structural equations modeling in Freie Universität in Berlin, Germany. He has constructed several standardized measures, scales, and tests for various purposes in the educational context. He received numerous awards in line with his research work, such as the Outstanding Scientific Paper in Social Science in 2008 by the National Academy of Science and Technology, Honorary Regional Advisor of Time Taylor International, Simeo Inotech Research Fellow, and 2011 Outstanding Young Scientist in the Republic of the Philippines. He is one of the 200 renowned global scientists given recognition by the Global Science Academy. He published over 110 publications in scientific, refereed, and abstracted journals. He is presently the top 91 highly cited scientist in the country, reported by Google Scholar through Webometrics across 500 Filipino scientists. In education, he received recognition for excellence in teaching, such as Students' Choice Award by the College of Education in De La Salle University, Manila, 2011 Lasallian Excellence Award Student Search for Outstanding Teacher, and Best Junior Faculty in Psychology.
He was commissioned by the DepEd in 2011 in writing the report for policy recommendations for the K-12 and the 2014 assessment framework, learning and development system, principal's tests, and the superintendent's leadership program in 2018. He is part of the Commission on Higher Education's Technical Working Group on developing the framework and policy for flexible learning deliveries. He was recently commissioned by the Network on Education Quality Monitoring in the Asia and Pacific by the UNESCO to review the impact of disaster and calamities on the status of high-stakes testing in Southeast Asia. Dr. Magno has conducted several seminars, workshops, and lectures on educational development in teaching, learning, and assessment around Southeast Asia, Middle East, and the Pacific region. He is also a consultant to the various ministries of education in developing countries in the Pacific, like the Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Samoa. He served as a consultant in various sectors such as the Department of Education, National Council of Indigenous People, and other private institutions like the De La Salle College of St. Benilde, Xavier School, Far Eastern University, Malayan College, Laguna and Mindanao, Mapua University, University of Bohol, Biliran Province State University, and the Asian Institute of Management. So ladies and gentlemen, let us all give a warm applause and welcome our guest speaker and resource speaker today, Dr. Carlo P. Magno.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Carlo Magno, and the important concepts that we're going to talk about this afternoon is actually introduced by our two hosts, which is how do we actually promote heuristics and metacognitive assessment in the new normal. When you talk about, of course, metacognition, this was already defined to us. And heuristics would actually refer to mental processes that are used by our students. So the perspective that we need to take in this session this afternoon is that we need to believe that each one of our learners are able to make some adaptations, to make improvements, and go through that process of thinking about the important skills and competencies that they need to learn. So the objective of our session for this afternoon is for you teachers to integrate these metacognitive skills, especially when you conduct formative assessments on different learning tasks, regardless of the modality, whether it's going to be an online, offline, or other modes, and create metacognitive tasks as included in your self-learning modules. So we will be answering two important questions, okay, in this session. First is, how do we improve students' thinking process when they go through the self-learning module? Second is, how do we develop students to take control over their own learning? Let's illustrate and answer the first question by looking at the first case. In this particular case, okay, this is the case of Jane. So Jane is a college student taking up her algebra class, and every time her teacher presents word problems that need to be solved, she stumbles, stops, panics, and doesn't know what to do. For example, the teacher writes on the board the problem. So we have a distance problem here and a time problem. So the period t, time in seconds for one complete cycle of a simple pendulum, is related to the length L in feet of the pendulum by the formula AT squared is equal to pi squared L. So if a child is on a swing with a 10-foot chain, then how long does it take to complete one cycle of the swing? So in the case of Jane, it takes her around 30 to 40 minutes for her to stare at the word problem. And every time she attempts to write something, she suddenly stops and is uncertain on what she is doing. So this is your typical student. Every time that you give them word problems in mathematics, and especially when it is written in English, they usually stop, stumble, panics, and because of these negative emotions, then it starts to interfere with their thinking. Therefore, they don't know what to do next. And it takes about 30 to 40 minutes for them to look at the task, and then they stop. And then if they start to attempt to answer it, okay, they start to become uncertain whether what they are doing is correct or not. And this is a problematic situation. Let's take a look at another case. This time, this is the case of RJ. So RJ, whenever he is faced with mathematical word problems, makes himself relax. He thinks of the steps on how to solve the problem. He determines what is asked or required. He extracts the given, translates the problem into an equation. He represents the unknown into X. He proceeds to solve the problem, checks his answer. He reviews his answer by rereading the problem and checking his computation. You will notice that I have made red fonts for some of the characteristics that are executed by RJ, like making himself relax. He thinks of the steps. He determines what is asked. He extracts what is given. He translates the problem into an equation. Okay, he is representing the unknown. He checks his answers, reviewing his answer, and checking for his computation. Given that these particular strategies, as we can say, are implemented by RJ, there is likelihood that he will be able to solve the problem successfully, as compared to the case of Jane. How we wish that each one of our learners is like RJ, who adapt certain strategies and are independent enough to control over their own learning. A while ago, our two hosts has indicated that when the learners starts to implement such strategies that we call as metacognition, they now start to control their own learning. These strategies are the ones that are highlighted. And when our students starts to implement this one, they start to have that awareness that when they implement these particular strategies, their performance will improve. Our role now is to think of ways on how we facilitate these strategies to occur among our students. Okay, so first, let's review what is metacognition. This was already explained to us a while ago, that metacognition is thinking about thinking. This is the case when our learner starts to become aware of their own learning. When they start to know that these are the strategies that they will implement to memorize the definition or a list of concepts, these are the strategies that they will implement in order to understand very well what they are reading. These are the steps that they will be undertaking in order to write a composition or answer a question appropriately. These are metacognitive skills. And metacognitive skills are considered to be executive skills, meaning to say they go beyond cognition. Our usual cognition, of course, is already provided by Benjamin Bloom, Anderson, and Krathwohl. Your usual cognitive process involves recalling, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Metacognition now sits on top of these cognitive skills. What do we do in order to recall information better? What do learners need to adapt in order to understand what they are reading better? What do they need to do to make application more appropriate? What do they need to do in order to come up with better evaluations? What steps do they need to undertake in order to create and analyze situations and products better? So this is what we mean when we say that metacognition is an executive skill. Furthermore, within the perspective of heuristics, Wynne and Snyder have explained that metacognition is a mental process, and there are two simultaneous processes that are ongoing when the learners execute metacognition. One is that they are monitoring their progress. If the learner, like the case of RJ a while ago, is going through and answering the word problem, he's now looking at ways in order to become sure of his answer. When he starts to think about ways to ensure that his answers are correct, he is starting to monitor his own learning and performance. And when he starts to think of ways on how to execute that, he now makes changes in his strategies. He adapts strategies, okay? And then if he identifies that it is not working well, then he would change and make improvements on those strategies. The one that he actually made use is checking his answer. So these are two simultaneous processes that are ongoing when our learners execute metacognition. And according to Shaw and Denison, which the model that we are going to explain briefly, that metacognition is composed of two important factors. So one is the knowledge of cognition, and the other one is the regulation of cognition, which was also explained by our two hosts at the beginning of our session. Now, what is the advantage when we teach our learners metacognition, and eventually our learners becomes and adapts metacognitive to a high extent. Generally, this was shown in some of the studies that I have published. One would be a research where I looked at learners who adapts metacognition and what would be its effect or outcome on their critical thinking. So in the journal called Metacognition and Learning, you can actually Google this one. I found out that the learners who makes use of metacognition and is able to become conscious of all of the 7 strands of regulation of cognition and knowledge cognition are more able to increase their critical thinking. So what I've concluded in this paper is that when students make use of an executive thinking process, therefore, performance goes beyond an executive level as well, such as higher forms of thinking like critical thinking. We also attempted to explain some other long-term goals as an outcome of metacognition. We found out in this paper, okay, this is actually a book chapter, Can Students Value for Formative Assessment Develop Their Academic Self-Regulation and Grit? Part of what we execute in self-regulation is also heuristics, is also referring to strategies that are metacognitive. So we found out here that when the students value formative assessment, so these are the exercises that are iterative that we provide among our learners, when they value that process, then our learners starts to think of strategies on how they would revise their work and make improvements on their work. And when they take on that particular action, then they start to become passionate and persevere over their performance, which we call as grit. Okay, now let's look at specifically how we implement the 2 components of metacognition as explained by Shaw and Denison. So the first one is to become aware of their learning, their preferences for learning, their strengths, their limitations, okay, and how they use it in order to execute well their performance and pass. The other aspect is the regulation of cognition. If they are aware about their own strengths and weaknesses, how do they now take control over that awareness? This is now the procedural aspect of metacognition. Okay, let's take a look at some of the subcomponents first of the knowledge of cognition. So you have 3. You have declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, and conditional knowledge. After this one, we'll take a look at some strategies that we can actually adopt for each of these components of metacognition. Okay, so the learners manifest declarative knowledge when they start to know what is important to learn. They read a lot of information in the references that we provide to them and to the SLM. If they can isolate those parts that they need to learn, then they manifest declarative knowledge. If they start to understand their own strengths and weaknesses and make ways to overcome those particular weaknesses, these are manifestations of declarative knowledge. Procedural knowledge, when they start to implement a procedure like adapting a particular strategy, when they start to implement a step-by-step procedure on how to accomplish a task, when they begin by thinking about the purpose of the strategy and think about the step-by-step way to execute that strategy, that's procedural knowledge. Conditional knowledge is when they use a particular learning procedure and they make judgment on which situations this particular procedure is going to be appropriate. Example, if you provide a computational problem for a grade 1 student and you give them 5 plus 3, and in order to facilitate the answer for 5 plus 3, they try to make use of counters or get 5 marbles and they combine it with other 3 marbles and they start counting all together when you combine them. So that's conditional. That's a strategy that they adapt. However, when you give now the learner an equation 128 plus 364, it's now going to be difficult to make use of, to collect those amount of marbles. So therefore, they will use a different strategy. that is appropriate, and that is conditional knowledge, knowing when to implement particular strategies. The other one is the regulation of cognition. So regulation of cognition is manifested when our learner starts to plan, set goals, and allocate resources before they execute a task. Examples would be pacing oneself when they study in order to have enough time. So if the summative assessment is provided on a particular date, they would start to study weeks before so that they can prepare well. This is planning. They think about what really needs to be learned before beginning a task. They begin with an end mind, the purpose for it. And sometimes they would even match it with their own long-term goals. This is planning. The other one is information management strategies, how individuals process information that are presented to them effectively, like organizing text, giving elaborations, summarizing in their own words, and selectively focusing on the important parts of the information. Example would be when they're starting to read a paragraph, they try to slow down on some of the important information that they need to process very well. Okay, they underline some of the difficult words that they don't understand and try to look for the meanings of these difficult words. These are information management strategies. You will also notice sometimes that your learners would scribble on the margins of the book to point out some important parts that they need to remember and focus on. These are information management strategies. Another would be monitoring. They're now assessing their learning while they are executing the task. Examples would be what alternatives can be used to solve a problem. They pause regularly when they are reading to check on their comprehension. Examples would be thinking aloud. Other ways of regulating one's cognition is through debugging strategies. Okay, these are strategies to correct one's comprehension and error. If our learners are effective in monitoring themselves while they are executing the task, and they found out that the strategy that they're using is not working well, they would immediately adapt to a different strategy. This is debugging. They make immediate corrections to some of the errors. This happens that when we give our students a chance to write a first draft of a composition, they reread usually their composition and make some revisions on their own. So these are debugging strategies. Other strategy under regulation of cognition would be evaluating their own learning. They now try to analyze, okay, the strategy that they have adapted after they have executed the task. Specific examples would be they summarize after they learn, they find easier ways to do it. In the case of RJ, he tried to do some rechecking of his answers. Now, how do we determine students' metacognition? There are two ways on how we determine the extent of our learners' metacognition. One is you can directly make use of an inventory in order to assess whether our students are adapting such strategies. Okay, so this is the metacognitive assessment inventory that was developed by Schroe and Dennison. Another one would be an observational tool. So the teacher would engage a learner on a particular task, and then the teacher would observe and ask some questions while the learner is doing the task. Okay, this is an interview, okay, schedule, and this is found in one of the papers that I have published in the Educational Measurement and Evaluation Review in 2010. Okay, others, of course, would be assessing the student's answer. And then after they answer, you ask them some probing questions like, how did you arrive at your answers? What steps have you undertaken? Once that they are able to verbalize and explicitly tell you, these are evidences that metacognition is ongoing. And sometimes what you will notice is that learners who perform well are those learners that adapts effective metacognitive strategies, and the learners that still needs time to get the correct answer and meet the criteria would be those learners that are not adapting effectively metacognitive strategies. So next step would be we now facilitate conditions, teach these learners, okay, to adapt effective metacognitive strategies. And how do we now apply and teach meta cognition. Okay, so the first approach is it begins by looking at the curriculum, looking at your plan. If you will be looking at the interim guidelines for grading for assessing our students, okay, to support the learning continuity plan that was released last October, it includes an attachment, which is the classroom assessment resource book. It indicates there that we need to break down the learning competency of a lesson. And this is what you call usually as the subtask. And when you break down the learning competency, okay, you need to indicate 3 important things. Okay? Example, in grade 6, English, the learning competency that is found in MELC would be compose a persuasive essay on self-selected topic. Usually, when you break apart these particular learning competency, you think about what the student needs to know in order to perform this task and what the student should be able to do. Another leg of subtasks that you can include would be the metacognitive subtask. How will the student be able to execute well what they know and how they will do it? Let's take a look at this particular example. In order for the students to compose a persuasive essay, what they need to know is to identify the features of a persuasive essay, what they should be able to do. They should be able to write the persuasive essay. Now, what is the metacognition we can put as a subtask? Example would be plan the essay through reading model examples and outline their ideas. So outlining the ideas would help them plan to write the essay very well. Looking at example of a good and well-written essays would serve as a model so that they can pace their work up given a particular standard. Another example in mathematics, the learning competency for grade 7 indicates uses appropriate statistical measures in analyzing and interpreting statistical data. What the students are able to know, they should be able to compute for the measures of central tendency and variability. What they should be able to do, select the appropriate central tendency and variability given the level of measurement. So what metacognition can be included here? So students can draw a criteria in the selection of appropriate central tendency and variability given some consideration. So when the student starts to formulate their own ideas, they're now making evaluations of their learning. In science, the learning competency for grade 7 indicates infer that waves carry energy. So these are the 3 subtasks. First, they should be able to identify the properties of waves and observe the pattern of different waves. So the metacognitive involved here is to plan an experiment to prove that waves carry energy. So before we execute metacognition, it's very important that metacognition becomes part of our learning target, or it becomes one of the objectives. Now, are we allowed to include it as an objective? We all know that every year, we now start to make improvement of our self-learning modules in the process of contextualization. So when we start to contextualize our self-learning modules, part of the improvement that we make is the inclusion of a subtask for us to observe whether our learners are going to manifest metacognition or not. That's the first way. Another way on how we implement metacognition, okay, we can actually integrate metacognitive prompts and activities as part of our self-learning modules. Okay, let me show you now an example on how you integrate and put in metacognitive prompts and activities as part of your self-learning module. So this is a self-learning module on matter. And the subtask would include describe the characteristics and elements of a compound. This is in science. Distinguish elements from compounds based on a set of properties. Classify substances as either element or compound. So after the students goes through the objectives, okay, you can put in a prompt right after. Example, what do you want to do with the materials around you if you are able to attain these goals. Okay, provided that they understand what these goals are. Give a scenario. So this is planning. And then, of course, usually your SLM begins with a pre-assessment. So after they go through the pre-assessment, you can ask the students, okay, choose one item where you are confident correct. How are you able to derive your answer on this one? Okay, so our goal here is for the students to explicitly give the procedure and strategy that they use to arrive at their answer. So this can be part of information management. Okay, so you have here a particular task again, and students will have to indicate whether the given would be an element or compound. Okay, then you can provide again a post-metacognitive prompt after they go through this assessment. What helped you determine if the given is an element or compound? We are now interested on how they are able to arrive at their answers. Okay, this is information management. How will you verify if your answer is correct? That's procedural knowledge. Execute your plan to verify your answers. Okay, so they're now using debugging strategy because you're asking them to make use of alternative strategies. Okay, and then you go through the lesson, what's in, they read this particular stimuli, and then you can probably do some processing right after. Use your technique, okay, the one that they have generated before, to verify if the given is an element or compound. Was your technique effective? Why or why not? So they're now starting to evaluate their own learning. Okay, they go through the other activities, and then you will notice that metacognitive prompts can be given before the lesson, before that part or section of your lesson in the SLM, or even after each of the assessment tasks. Like this one, this is provided after the assessment task. Okay, same as this one and the others. Okay, so I can actually provide these SLM with some of the notations as part of the example. Okay, so it's very important to help our learners to think about their thinking, because this is one way for them to adapt certain strategies in order for them to perform well. And our role is that when we are able now to detect and see that some of our learners are not performing well, one of the possible reasons for this underperformance is them not adapting appropriate strategies for learning that includes metacognition. Therefore, we now start to facilitate and create conditions for them to adapt and use these metacognitive strategies. And there are two ways on how we do that, as indicated in the session this afternoon. One is make learning targets or objectives for us to be able to observe if metacognitive is reached. Second is to integrate these prompts as part of the self-learning module. And if you're now going to implement it face-to-face, when you execute your instruction inside the classroom, these prompts can be inserted in your procedure. All right, thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Carlo Magno, for a very engaging and meaningful discussion on metacognition, and metacognitive prompts. Your years of research, your depth of understanding assessment, and your ability to present a very good example, none other than the use of our self-learning modules or SLM, has made this session a memorable one to our viewers, to our dear teachers. And we are very much grateful for your time and effort to share with us your expertise on this matter. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Carlo Magno. And so to our live audience on DepEd Teaches Facebook page and the rest of our social media platforms, don't forget to share your insights and comments using the hashtag I support DepEd Teaches, and hashtag DepEd Teaches episode 41. You can also share your selfie post while you were listening in today's presentation, and we would love to hear all your feedback.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlo Magno. So for those who haven't registered yet, you can scan the QR code or access the link to do a one-time registration for the month of October. Evaluation will be given next week, so you can receive your certificates. Once again, thank you very much to our viewers here on DepEd Teaches.
And this wraps up our episode for the third week of October. So on behalf of the curriculum and instruction strand, thank you, our dear teachers, for spending your afternoon with us. It's been always a pleasure to see your active participation in our discussion in our live streaming page. It is once said that if we teach a person of what to learn, we are just preparing them or that person for the past. But if we teach a person how to learn, we are preparing them for the future. Just like our mission here on DepEd Teaches, it is about empowering teachers and enabling learners. See you again next week, and stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Okay na po, pwede na pong